Okay, everyone, this is Steve with my audio stuff, and I'd like to introduce you to what I consider to be one of the best two head decks that you could get. I said one of the best, and this is my Harman Kardon TD 262 cassette deck. I have this hooked underneath to a Harman Kardon 930 twin power receiver and a Harman Kardon EQ8, which is probably one of the best EQs you can get on the market. 105 dB noise floor and 5 to 140,000 hertz frequency response. So really, you can hook these into real sensitive amplifiers, and it won't add its noise or lack of frequency response to the amplifier circuitry. It's a great EQ. Anyway, the one that I'm going to concentrate on, though, however, is this. So I've owned a lot of cassette decks in my life, and yes, I'm still kind of a cassette deck nut. But here are the reasons why I think that this is probably one of the best two-head decks you can get. It is one of the few decks that has an amorphous head in it. Now, these were somewhat popular starting in the late 80s to about the mid-90s when cassette decks finally breathed their last gasp. The amorphous head is simply a different formulation of metal that saturates or has greater dynamic range at higher frequencies. And then the other benefit of this deck is that, as many decks during this time had, it's HX Pro. And that means that the bias is continually varied, and that, again, gives you better high-frequency headroom. And so in many ways, this deck comes pretty close to what some of the premium three-head decks already had, which was superior high-frequency response and superior dynamic range in the high frequencies. So these two things right here are one of the primary reasons why I like this deck. Also, the Harman Kardon ultra wideband circuitry, and that simply means that in an age of op-amp circuits, integrated chips that they use to handle audio in a lot of decks, record and playback, this thing uses individual discrete transistors, which in a general sense will often give you superior dynamic range, lower noise, and superior frequency response, all of which obviously benefit the recording and playback of tapes. So those three things, the discrete circuitry, the amorphous head, which gives you better high frequency saturation, and the HX Pro headroom extension system, which on this deck is just automatic, it's just always on, which also gives you superior high frequency dynamic range. So if you record stuff with hard-hitting brass or whatever, this thing will generally capture it all. And you can use, different formulations. Obviously, this is pretty simplistic. If you look at the controls, low noise, that's just for standard ferric tapes, CRO2 for type 2 tapes, and then metal, which unless you can get it on eBay, it's not really available anymore. Interesting thing about metal, by the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, a lot of these tapes had caught up with metal as far as the dynamic range which metal offered you. So that's why more or less they discontinued it. So very simplistic controls, tape counters. This is a solenoid operated deck, and it's a two-belt deck. One belt for the counter and one belt for the capistan, which powers everything else via gears and rubberized wheels inside this thing. So just two belts, and I replaced them with a belt kit, about $15 on eBay, brand new. A little tricky putting some of the belts in, but if you have half a brain, it's not that bad. And then you have a deck that'll last you another 20 years. Again, back on the controls. There's a memory switch there, so you can set that for 0, and then it'll stop when it gets back to 0. Noise reduction, just Dolby B and C, not Dolby S. But again, with chromium tape, it's going to approach 80 dB as far as the noise reduction. So it's pretty good. MPX filter for recording FM broadcasts. With your Dolby noise reduction activated, it filters out the 19 kilohertz pilot, stereo pilot. So it can't interfere with Dolby. And then you can see the bias fine trim, and I like my recordings a little on the bright side, so I have that bumped up. Normally it would be set I can show you probably about right there for a perfectly flat recording, or as flat as my ears can tell. But I have this adjusted a little more. Balance control, and then of course the input level, and then record mute. That's actually kind of a helpful thing. Some people have the fast forward rewind music hunting feature on their decks, and you can put a muted spot on your tape so that that particular circuitry can find it and then stop at it. So that's not a bad thing. But anyway, so this is the Harman Kardon TD262, fully discrete, Amorphous head and Dolby HX Pro, and this is probably, again, one of the best decks. You can get these on eBay, probably a couple $100 now. They're more expensive. I got this one for $100, and the head on it was in perfect shape. The playback record combo head, the Amorphous head, was in perfect shape, and it makes really excellent recordings. Check out my other YouTube channel, A Father's Devotions. I have a link for it on this site as well. That's about all I have to say, and God bless all of you. This is My Audio Stuff.